Thank you very much. So we do have kind of an exciting topic today, and it's certainly one that everybody hears about. You hear it in conversation, but a lot of times we don't actually have a lot of practical experience with it. It's really dependent on the type of customers that you're currently dealing with, but we've definitely been seeing an ever increasing interest and deployment of containers. And as Scott mentioned, we have Naz and Randy with us today, and they're the experts that we get to bounce a number of questions off of and hopefully gain a lot of knowledge back. Before we start, Naz, why don't you just kind of give us a brief introduction and what you're doing, and then we'll do the same with Randy.
Yeah, I'll be glad to, right? So as my role, I'm the OpenShift data services leader, specialist. So my responsibility is to help our customers understand what our product is for data services for OpenShift workloads. So I'm I'm married to OpenShift right now, and we'll talk about that because as it relates to containerization and what that means. But there's within the IBM storage software portfolio, we have Storage Fusion. That what I would want us to all understand coming out of this call is a data services platform for OpenShift. Now, the reason I mean, if you followed me for the last couple of years, my title has changed because we have sort of evolved our offering from what we have been doing for OpenShift storage services to now a complete data services platform. But I mean, a complete data services platform, this is things that us as traditional storage people have been dealing with for years. How do I provide, block storage, file storage? How do I do data protection? How do I do HADR? So we've been doing that for legacy systems, VMware systems, but now the world's shifting, right? People are modernizing their applications on containers and these kind of things. And we happen to buy a great company that has the best OpenShift Kubernetes containerization platform, Red Hat. So obviously our goal from system storage software is to provide that same capability that we've been doing in the legacy world, the VMware world, to the OpenShift world. And that's really what we're doing here with Fusion, is to provide great storage services, provide integrated backup and recovery, provide HADR, the things that we know as storage guys. How do we bring that to an OpenShift world? So I'm helping my sellers bridge that gap. They're getting up to speed. And having calls like this is part of my job, right? So I hope I did a good recap there, Roger, but I'll turn it over.
I think so. And let's bounce it over to Randy and see what Randy's got for us.
Sure. Thanks, Roger. And thanks, guys, for inviting us to chat with you today. So like Naz, I'm also married to OpenShift, although full disclosure, I often cheat on it with VMware, high performance computing, AI and machine learning. So I guess I'm kind of a polygamist in that regard. But so we're both focused, though, very much on the same market opportunity and the same segments of the market. So I'm currently part of the product management organization within storage, focused on mostly Fusion, although I also dabble in Ceph, and I kind of do some cross portfolio strategy as well. So and I think just to amplify what Naz said, clearly the acquisition of Red Hat, which happened, I guess now 4 years ago almost. It feels like yesterday, but it happened a few years ago. Has been a really, really significant step forward for IBM in the hybrid cloud space. I mean, IBM at the top level, we portray ourselves as a cloud and AI company. I mean, that is our kind of reason for existence. That's our mission. That's what we're trying to bring into the world and bring into our customer base. Bringing Red Hat into the family was a very obvious and very logical thing to do. Not only because they are the industry leader, as Nas said, in the containerization and orchestration space with OpenShift, but because bringing Red Hat together. And by the way, for those who aren't aware, we were very closely partnering with Red Hat for, a decade, actually more than a decade prior to the acquisition. So, we go back a long way. It was a long courtship before we finally kind of consummated the relationship. I argue, and regularly do argue with customers and partners and analysts, that we, IBM, are the only player, the only technology player that can truly offer a full stack, top to bottom, back to front, hybrid cloud solution. The hyperscalers can't do it. Our competitors can't do it. You could, in theory, build your own if you were very clever and had a very solid development organization and strong architects and strong consultants and, really, really sophisticated technology chops, but that's a pretty daunting task. So I think when you look at the market opportunity for application and IT and infrastructure modernization, that's in full swing, and you look at where we as IBM are positioned, it's a perfect convergence of those two things, right? The market opportunity is huge, it's growing, and we are extremely well positioned to seize upon it. So I think, from your perspective as sellers and partners and even consumers of the technology, it's kind of a great time to be alive. So one of the things we want to talk about today, I guess, is how we collectively are leveraging containerization, OpenShift, and the broader modernization trends and inertia in the marketplace to drive demand for our stuff, so we can all make more money. So anyway, I hope that helps. Naz and I work together a lot on this stuff, obviously, because we're kind of tackling the same stuff.
Well, that does help. I do appreciate it. And I'm tickled because I've now walked away with a new term that I too am a storage polygamist. So I just never thought of myself that way.
Roger. It's nothing to be ashamed. There's no shame in it.
Well, gentlemen, either one of you, let's just jump in and ask the question that we get right and left, day in, day out. And that's really...
Nope.
We lost him.
We lost your audio there, Roger. Hate it when that happens. It always happens at the most inopportune times too, right?
1 minute, I think. Almost there, Roger. Still moving your mouth, but no sound.
Just write it on a piece of paper and hold it up, right? I do that sometimes. I'm kidding, of course. Yeah, no problem. So actually, while Rogers is, and I believe me, I've been there. It's like when the audio issues happen. Let me just expand a little bit on what I said earlier, and Naz, you can jump in here. The kinds of questions you're probably getting from your customers right now fall into generally two categories. And my simple view of the world is some of them are infrastructure focused and some of them are application focused. And we'll try to address both, right? But I think you're going to find that a lot of organizations are thinking about and investing in modernization in some form or fashion. One thing I would hope to leave you with, and Naz can probably add on to this as well, infrastructure modernization should ideally precede application modernization, when in fact it usually is done in reverse, which is not optimal, and we can talk about why that is. But I just want to kind of plant that seed as a concept as we go forward here, that the infrastructure and the applications are obviously very closely related. They both require engineering and design effort to modernize. You want to ideally do the infrastructure first if possible. So I'll just throw that out there. Roger, sorry. Yeah, I will go back to you.
Okay. No, that's great. That's what happens when you push the wrong button. So what I was building up to was, we get asked this all the time, and I'm confident that both you, Randy, and Naz get this. And that's, what is the key differences between VMware and containers? Is it an all or nothing, which I think we all know it's not an all or nothing, but what's the real differences, and when do I skew one direction necessarily versus the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. Naz, if you want to jump on that first, I got a graphic I'm going to try to find here that I think will help answer the question as well.
Hey, Roger, I just experienced a technical difficulty. Can you repeat the question, please? Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah. What is the real difference between VMs and containers? We get people asking, well, is it this against this? Do
Right.
they work in harmony? When do I choose one versus the other?
Yeah, no, great question. Great question. So I'll take you back through the journey of how we got to VMs, right? So, they're a typical application stack, you have application software, there's an OS, the OS needs, storage, networking, and that's the stack. And we saw that stack go from mainframes, mini computers, personal computers, client server kind of architecture, and that's the evolution. And then in that evolution, virtualization got into play because we saw when customers started deploying these applications on client server architecture that there was a lot of waste, right? There was a lot of applications being deployed in silos, and you had server sprawl. Along comes virtualization that basically said, I have all of this extra capacity on these servers and I'm just running a single application stack. What if I created a virtualization layer that can take all of those legacy applications and run them in virtual machines on a single, what we call virtualization hypervisor, right? And that is really how we got to VMs. And that we've been running in VMs for the last, 20 plus years. Great technology. But as technology evolves and the cloud has become so popular, and the ability to take workloads and make them more scalable and be able to support mobile phones and the modernization that we all have, new technology has gotten developed, and it was really based on taking an application and breaking it into microservices. So, for example, a big ERP app that has things like, an accounts receivable, credit lookups, these, in the old days, that's a big monolithic. If you were to take an application like that and break it down into specific microservices and put those in containerization, now I've created an API-based architecture. I could scale up each individual component as I need to, rather than build this big old monolithic. So that's really the advent of containers, looking
Mhm.
at it from modernizing a legacy workload or even building a modern workload just based on services, APIs. And that's really the genesis of why containers became so popular. So, and the beauty of containers is that it does not need a hypervisor layer, right? It could run
Yep.
natively on an OS. So you really get rid of, I need to, in the VM world, each virtual machine has their own OS, and you have to manage each OS, patch it separately. In
Mhm.
a containerized world, and then we'll get into more details of what containers mean. But in a containerized world, they're running on one OS, right? So you've got a lot more efficient, slimmer stack. And that can scale, and the beauty of this is that you build it once and potentially you can run it anywhere, right?
Yeah, and of course I can't find the graphic I was looking for. So in the continuing theme of technical difficulties, I'll just dogpile on what Nas said. So the biggest kind of advantage of containers, and the evolutionary view of it is the right way to think about it, right? We went from kind of monolithic computing to client server to virtualized, and at each step of the way it's all about two things: cost optimization and resource utilization, right? So how do you develop infrastructure and design infrastructure that you can consume in the most efficient way, both from a cost perspective and a utilization perspective? So containers took virtualization and further subdivided, or further, atomized the workloads into smaller units and made them more easily instantiable, which that is actually a word, believe it or not. So you can spin up microservices and containers more rapidly and in a more automated way. Automation is another very important key to why containers are so popular, because you can, in very sophisticated but also very simple ways, automate how they are deployed and how they behave, right? So containers provide better resource utilization. They provide the ability to automate to much greater degree at scale. And they also provide a third benefit, which is the ability to get applications and services into service and into production faster. So the whole idea of DevOps, and you'll hear the term CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development, container technology and microservices technology enables developers to deploy services faster because they can do it in smaller increments and smaller pieces, and they can deploy those in a more agile, elastic way. So they don't have to, for example, bring an entire application monolithic stack down, plug in some new updates, and then put forward or spin up the new application. Yeah, here you go. This is very similar to what I was looking for. So anyway, yeah, that just to expand on what Naz was saying, that's kind of the evolution, and going forward, if you think about the way containers and microservices and kind of serverless computing works, the benefits of automation we talked about before, the next obvious evolutionary step, and we're already doing it, is automation through AI, right? So using AI and machine learning and deep learning to intelligently deploy services, applications, monitor them, manage them, repair them when they break, predict when they're going to break. So that's really where, for example, the Watson X offering starts to become more prominent. And then there are others, but I'll just use that as an example since we're all getting sort of bombarded with Watson X lately. So anyway, long answer to a short question, but hopefully that helps. One last thing I'll add very quickly is just when you hear your customer use terms like modernization, hybrid cloud, cloud native, web-based, web scale, although they're not saying containerization, they are sort of, it rhymes with containerization, basically. The implication is that those workloads are very likely containerized. They're definitely virtualized, and they're very likely also containerized. So I'll just add that.
Yeah, and I think I'll also add on to that, Randy. And when we're talking about containerization, right? I know the key um, technology concept here is that I build once and I can deploy anywhere, right?
Yeah,
And
great
that's
point. Didn't
that's
even mention
really
that.
that's really key
Yeah,
for a lot of
absolutely.
our customers is that now I have a hybrid multi-cloud strategy. I am not
Yeah,
stuck on-prem. So if I have a cloud strategy or a multi-cloud strategy, or even some of our customers say, you know what, I'm a cloud first customer. It just
yep,
makes sense for my business.
yeah,
This containerization technology enables that. I could run it anywhere, so
great point.
it's a
Yep,
real,
platform agnostic. Yeah, that's a really, really good point when I completely forgot. Yep.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool.
Uh-oh, Roger, you're in the mute cave again.
Press the button.
Sorry. This is not going to be my day, but this is interesting because you both touched on something when you talked about the scalability and how rapidly you can spin it up. Some of the most interesting examples I've seen, well, last year, I saw this example where they were discussing a client who, as Black Friday approached, was able to dynamically scale their system to handle this just phenomenal, rapidly increasing workload. But equally important, they were able to then dial it back just as quickly. And so the resource utilization was actually fantastic. You used what you needed when you needed it and no longer. And that really is amazing, coupled with the speed that you can make that happen.
Yeah,
You know, go ahead.
sorry, Roger. That elasticity is a key element of containers and the automation and the ability to quickly provision and deprovision those things. That's a really, really good point.
Yeah, no, and I think where that leads into is Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes and containerization. So containerization, you saw that graphic, that's containerization. But when you put a complete management platform around that, that's really Kubernetes, containerization, the elasticity, all of that technologies. If a container fails, can I spin up another one? If I need workload, how do I spin up more of those containers to support that workload, supporting your Black Friday scenario? And that's really Kubernetes, Kubernetes with containerization. And guys, we'll tie it back to why we're here. I mean, that's why IBM purchased the number one Kubernetes platform out there, right? Red Hat
Amen.
OpenShift. And
Yeah, and just to put a finer point on it, this is one of my favorite graphics, getting back to Roger's point about how things have changed. This is the number of years it took for each of these to gain 50 million users. And you can see over the span of multiple years and multiple technologies and generations, obviously the time frames are so compressed and so collapsed that the ability to have that elasticity and agility is no longer optional. Like, you have to have the ability to respond very, very quickly to things like this. And since that, actually, this is actually about a year and a half, actually 2 years old now, when Meta launched Threads, which is their kind of Twitter X, whatever it's called now, competitor. They got to 100 million users in something like 12 hours, right? So the fact that infrastructure is now required to react and respond, to read and react to that kind of demand at that pace, is exactly why containerization and Kubernetes and OpenShift are really kind of growing by leaps and bounds.
And maybe you guys, and you've just kind of touched on it, and maybe for the really well informed, even directly addressed it. But, I've often heard or been shown the visualization that Kubernetes, which is right there at the center, Kubernetes, putting a lot of it together is like looking at all the pieces of a car laying on the ground, and you have to do all the assembly and put it together and get it moving. But that OpenShift is sort of like being handed the car already working and ready to go. Is that a fair analogy? I'm just wanting to touch a little more on that monitoring and managing aspect because of the sheer ability to scale this thing. That's such a critical piece.
Yeah, that's a great question, Roger, and it's a good observation. And one of the interesting kind of like dichotomies that we deal with is, especially when we're selling into organizations that are kind of conservative and maybe dealing with more traditional infrastructure, 2-tier and 3-tier systems. The comprehension or the understanding that OpenShift is based on open source technology. I mean, that's what Red Hat did. Red Hat's claim to fame was they took open source technology, they hardened it, and they created a commercial offering around it that's fully supported, fully integrated, and that created a very successful company, which is now part of IBM. Now, you can still build a functional equivalent of OpenShift yourself. There are all the open source components exist, they're all available, they're all free. You can go cobble it together yourself, and many do. Lots of organizations do that. The challenge with that, of course, is that then when something goes wrong, you are responsible for solving it, right? You can't call the vendor, you can't call IBM, you can't call Oracle, you can't call Amazon. You kind of put it out on Reddit, you put it out on your bulletin board of choice, and hope that somebody responds, and some weird developer halfway around the world can solve it for you. So that's a high risk way to run your business, right? So what OpenShift did, and OpenStack before it, was bring those open source components together. Again, integrate them, harden them, test them, pre-integrate them, and deliver it as a fully supported solution, right? Bundle, if you want to use the term bundle, right? With one call to support it, right? So one call to support the whole thing, top to bottom. So that's the real value. And again, it still leverages open source technology. There are still upstream open source projects which feed into open source, or OpenStack rather, OpenShift as well. That's not going to change, right? We still support the OpenShift community. But the beauty of that is now if I run OpenShift, I can run any number of thousands of different commercial and open source technologies in one place and do so confidently because they're all based on the same set of standards and they're all supported by, enterprise grade vendors like IBM and Red Hat and others. So, long answer, but hopefully that helps kind of you're correct. I mean, that's the beauty of OpenShift is it puts it all together and delivers it in a single, very capable, fully supported, fully managed, and fully instrumented package. So, Naz, I don't know if you want to
No,
add
I
anything
think
to
you
that.
summarized it well. If you put it in a car analogy, it's a luxury car with, all of the prescribed kind of things that you need to make driving, easier, versus, I have to do a manual stick shift, press my clutch, do this. So anyway, I think, yeah, it's the easy button for OpenShift.
Yeah, Vincent Su used a great analogy in a webinar I recorded with him recently where he said, essentially customers, are saying, look, I want a minivan with like 30 cup holders because it's practical and I just want that. But I also want it to have a 600 horsepower engine because I want to be able to pass anyone on the highway. It's like, you can have it. That's what you want. You can have it.
Yeah, here it
So,
is. Yep.
I like that. Well, then let me ask you another question around all of this, and that is for clients, particularly, I would assume more of the medium, those mid-market companies. What's the learning curve for their IT team if they want to start making this transition?
I'll let Nas tackle that one first because he's much closer to customer discussions
So
on a daily basis.
I think this is why there is a OpenShift prescribed version for Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes has many levers, knobs, lots of things you can tune. That's why you see so many distributions out there. You can build it your own. You can go to a cloud. You can use Amazon's flavor of it. You can use, Azure. There are tons of it out there. But Red Hat, similar to what they did with with Linux, they made it easy for our customers to consume, right? So they pick that, and that's what Red Hat does. They take open source technologies, they apply their expertise and make it prescribed, make it simple, easy to consume. So for your particular market, I think that applies. Your OpenShift distribution of Kubernetes and containerization is a prescribed, easy to use kind of deployment. Think of it as what RHEL did to Linux. That's what does for Kubernetes and containerization, right?
Yeah, and also a good point that Nas just touched on is that although OpenShift is certainly used in Fortune 100 companies and very large agencies and organizations around the world, it's also very popular in the mid-market too, because for all the reasons we've talked about, it's like the 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 requirements and the challenges and the opportunities are the same. They might be, they might have a smaller dollar amount attached to them, or they might be more geo-focused, but they're the same, right? It's speed, it's agility, it's time to market, it's competitive posture. It's all the same things, right? So that domain is well served by OpenShift. So again, Red Hat built their business kind of democratizing or, for lack of a better word, socializing the usage of containerization across all industries of all sizes.
No, yes, I agree. And when we think of where our world here at IBM marries to OpenShift, it's about operationalizing your OpenShift deployments. Randy and I have been in this space for many years, and you guys too. But when we think customers are moving their enterprise workloads to containerization, to Kubernetes, and orchestration, being able to burst workloads, you know, that is cool. Kubernetes does that. OpenShift does that. But where do we fit into that equation? And for us, in the system storage business, it's about providing the data services that we've always needed in our legacy systems. Now that and it's an evolution. legacy systems, the virtualization. Now we're in this Kubernetes containerization world, but those key data services don't go away. We need to
Yeah.
provide persistent storage. We need to be able to provide data resiliency, HA. We need data protection, data discovery, all the things that we've been doing to our legacy systems. We need to provide these to the OpenShift Kubernetes containerization system. And that's really what Fusion does, right? We
Mhm.
bring those key data services. And I'm quoting, putting my fingers around data services because it's really more than just storage. Because when we think about what Kubernetes and OpenShift is, it's a data services kind of offering, that you need to provide to these
Yeah.
workloads.
And a great example or an illustration of that is, for those who have been doing this as long as, Naz and Roger and the folks here on the call have, you may remember back in the early days of virtualization when VMware kind of burst onto the scene. One of the first challenges that was presented by enterprise deployments was the phenomenon that was frequently called the IO blender effect, where people were trying to deploy a bunch of VM clusters and a bunch of hypervisors using their storage infrastructure and their SAN infrastructure from their legacy environments, and quickly choked the SAN with all the traffic coming from the VMs across multiple VMs. So lesson learned as we move into containerization, that challenge, the ability to deploy and distribute IO traffic across a huge cluster that's very elastic, is even more pronounced. The good news is we kind of learned that painful lesson and we engineered for that with the deployment of how we do data services in Kubernetes. So we're able to overcome that from the design stage. So good. That's just one illustration to kind of build upon what Naz was saying.
Well, that's fantastic. And you both actually right there at the end addressed the one thing I was going to, inquire about, which was persistence and that type of thing. And, it sounds like that is literally right at the heart of particular Fusion deployments.
Although I will say, interestingly, it wasn't at the beginning. So Kubernetes, which was originally born out of a project at Google called Borg, was not meant to support persistent data. It was meant entirely for stateless, ephemeral applications. So you would spin up a bunch of nodes or a bunch of microservices. They would perform some work and then they would disappear. They didn't persist data. They didn't persist state, right? So interestingly, the original design precept had nothing to do with persistence. But of course, what happened was enterprises said, wow, this is great. We can automate, we can deploy at scale, we have this great elasticity. This is wonderful, but we kind of need persistent data because our core operating environment or our core business apps require stated data. So, and state and persistent data. So there was a rapid pivot to supporting stated applications and persistent data. So anyway, just a quick aside.
No, that's great. And unfortunately, we've really kind of come to the end of our time. This has gone amazingly fast. But let me just ask you both if there's any, departing thoughts that you'd like to leave with folks.
You go first. Randy, go ahead, and I'll pile on.
Oh, man, throw me under the bus. I guess in parting, I would just say, you've got a great team available to you as you're engaging with customers or partners or whomever. Naz, myself, there's a bunch of people who work with us and behind us and around us, and we're here for you if you have any questions. If there's any difficult customer challenges, we've got a bunch of really active Slack channels focused around Fusion and around OpenShift. We're heavily plugged into watsonx, which may or may not be relevant, for the customers you're talking to today, but eventually it probably will be. But I guess just broadly speaking, when you encounter the tough questions or you need backup or support, or you want somebody to jump on a briefing call or whatever, don't hesitate. We're here to support you and here to back you up. We also got lots of assets out on Seismic. We've got a YouTube channel called Shift Happens, where you can find some good videos and kind of materials to help support this discussion as well. So, give us a shout. We're here to help.
That's perfect. I did see one question pop up in the chat real quick. It said stateful applications. Just as a point of clarification. So keep in mind that within, to Rand's point and how Kubernetes was generated, it was really it was supposed to be stateless, meaning that the pod that's running the workload. So think about when we talked about APIs and very discrete workloads living in containers, um, a state. It was designed to be stateless, right? So that pod stood up, ran its thing, and then went away. That's the advent of containers and Kubernetes. That's stateless. That means that that pod had its own mapping of storage within it. When it did its work, it went away. Now that we introduce more modern workloads or enterprise workloads to utilize this containerization Kubernetes technology, statefulness came into play. That means that that pod that's running that workload needs to have data that persists beyond its state, meaning that it does its work, it goes away, but that data that it was working with can be then utilized by another pod. Or if that pod went away and it spins up another one or needs to scale to support, enterprise workloads that said, okay, I need 30 pods to address my demand at that point in time, they're all looking at that persistent data. So that's what we mean by stateful applications versus stateless. And Kubernetes was initially, not Kubernetes, but containerization was initially designed to be stateless. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, and courtesy of ChatGPT, I just dropped a definition of stateless applications in the chat. So
perfect. All right, guys.
Well, I cannot thank you, gentlemen, enough. It's always great listening to the both of you, and particularly on this topic, because this continues to just be a red hot topic, and it's continuing to grow every time we turn around. And I really like, Randy, that you mentioned several times, and Naj, you may have also, that ultimately we're also starting to fold in Watson X. Mm-hmm. So gaining that artificial intelligence and machine learning to really help continue to build and even further simplify the process of doing this. So fantastic news, and I really do appreciate you coming. With that, I will turn it back over to Scott.
Thank you, Roger. So thank you, everyone who joined us. We definitely appreciate your time and interest in our monthly topic. Thanks to Naz and Randy for all of your insight and expertise. As I said, this is being recorded. It will be posted up to the Mid-Market Tech Talk YouTube channel if you want to review this again. And you'll look for an invite for next month's Tech Talk 4 weeks from now. So thanks again, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.